Thank you for agreeing to talk to us a little bit about pilot mental health and the impact that the COVID crisis is having on the general psyche and mental health of pilots. Can we just talk through what you could say with the phases of the impact that being grounded for such a period of time has?
Well, it's a really good question, and let's be very clear, we're still in the midst of a phase, and who knows how this is all going to evolve from here. So we're talking about phases whilst we're actually in them. I think if we look back over the last few weeks, many of us would have experienced in that first phase a lot of information coming toward us, but it was disassembled. It wasn't put together in some kind of holistic way. So there was rumour, there were snippets of information, we were hearing things down the line, we were on social media, and perhaps we were trying to gather more details about what was going on, and that's quite a frenetic time. The brain during that time will try and construct a holistic picture of what's going on, so it'll start to fill in bits of detail as well, sometimes creating false stories. This is happening because, and this is where rumour comes into it. So I think if we look back and think, even just these few weeks ago, about where we've evolved from that kind of rumour stage, what followed from that was that more information came to light, and we were then able to fill in those gaps in the information with detail, and the picture was more complete. And that led to a period of some kind of resignation, because I think many people then recognised there would be limitations on flying. Sadly, some careers came to an end because some airlines could no longer carry on functioning. And then we started having intense worries about our own well-being and the implications for our families and so on. And here we are in what is now a third stage, and probably there'll be others beyond this, where this has become the new normal. Now we are dealing with social or physical distancing, we're not at work, we're being challenged about how we're going to cope at home, sometimes with families that we might not want to be with, and longing to be with people who we would prefer to be with in some families. We've also heard that there is increased violence within families because the lockdown situation has created a lot more tensions. So the phase that we're in at the moment is that we're waiting for the good news. We are waiting for the green light, the all clear, or whatever the phased return to the new normal is going to be. And at this particular time, there'll be quite a lot of stress, worry and anxiety, perhaps some low mood as well, because we don't yet see a practical way through all of this. We don't know what our jobs are going to look like, we don't know where those are going to be, when we're going to restart, whether we'll be confident to do the job that we were doing in the same way, how long it will take us to retrain and so on. And that is aside from all the domestic issues that we have to deal with, such as looking after our families, loved ones and so on. I believe there will be other phases coming down the line, and obviously we'll have to think about those as we're experiencing them. But for now, it would be perfectly normal if people were feeling a heightened sense of anxiety at times for no apparent reason, sometimes some low mood, and sometimes even overwhelming anxiety, wondering what is going to become of me and my job and my sense of well-being, because this is a profound challenge to our whole sense of identity. Look, I think probably in many different ways. I'm going to stereotype terribly here, but I think that many pilots will recognise this, that pilots strive toward perfection. They may like or need to be in control of situations. And this current situation is thwarting that in many ways, because none of us know where this is going to lead to specifically. Obviously, we have hopes, and we hear things in the media, and the government are, sending out positive messages about support and so on. But it's going against the grain, the natural tendency to identify a problem and then to work toward its resolution. We can identify the problem, and then we may be slightly stymied because we realise we don't have sufficient control on all the facts and all the contingencies here in order to affect the outcome. So if it's, I would change my job, if it's, I would like to take 6 months off at the moment, if it's like I'm going to move to another airline later on, none of these options are currently available. So we're frozen in time. We can't make the decisions that we normally make in order to get us beyond the challenges. What does that do to us? Different things depending on our personality. For some people, leaping all the way forward leads to catastrophic thinking. So we start to think in terms of the worst case scenario. I will lose my job, I will lose my income, I will lose my house, I will lose the shirt on my back, and relationships around me. hopefully that's improbable, but the brain will take us to these dark, catastrophic places as a form of protection, by the way, because once we've embraced it and considered it, it's a way for the brain then to start to think, well, how am I going to deal with this in some kind of way? So we start to then break it down into manageable proportions. Let's get onto the building society or the bank to, pause our mortgage repayments, etc. So we do become quite practical at that level. For other people, anxiety literally goes through the roof. All of this energy churning around, these thoughts, these feelings, these challenges going through our minds that we're unable to settle, make us feel quite agitated. There's a lot of adrenaline, a lot of cortisol thumping around. And steam doesn't literally come off our heads, but it almost feels as if it is that. Many people I've spoken to are having problems with their sleep, appetite problems, and keeping to routine because they're churned up by the stress and the worry and the anxieties of what they're going through at the moment. So it's not unusual for people to find themselves awake in the middle of the night at the moment, even though they may be grounded and enjoying routines for sleep. And then the normal things that we would do to offset against stress and anxiety, perhaps regular exercise, social contact, may be disrupted. Most of us can't go to a gym. We may be unable to travel to other family members and friends to socialise, so we're resorting to using screen contact and so on. And all of that drives that even further. So what does it do to us? It can raise our levels of anxiety, it can drive our mood down a bit, we can get a bit depressed, but often this has a finite course. And what happens is that we tend to sink for a period and then we mobilise. It's a natural human reaction. So if we followed our patterns of reaction that many of us are going through at the moment, perhaps some days or weeks down the line, what will happen is we'll wake up one morning, we'll be full of energy and we will start to activate in some kind of way. And for pilots who are used to many different acronyms for dealing with stressful, challenging situations, there may be some difficulties here because there are usual forms of problem solving, and I know different airlines teach different kind of acronyms. These intuitive problem-solving exercises are all based on the fact that there must be a solution to the problem. At the moment, we don't know how long it's going to run for, when social distancing is going to be changed, when we're going to receive full pay again, when the next command course is going to come about, whether our airline is going to survive, which hopefully it will do. And so all of these unknowns pump up a lot of stress and anxiety. And so we have a huge challenge in order to contain it. But one of the things I would say is it's totally normal to go through these different phases and to experience these different feelings. It's not welcome, I don't wish this upon anyone, but it's normal to experience this kind of fluctuation. Well, that's a really good question. I think it is a challenge for those people who feel that they know everything about everything, and that's not to be rude or insensitive about a particular pilot at all. I think it's humbling in the sense that there is something bigger than all of us over here. It's bigger than doctors as well, and we do know that patients die, and they are dying, and much of this is obviously hugely sad and a very unwelcome situation that we're in, but we can't control every single fact at the moment. For pilots, it may be a bigger challenge, although there may be some similarities with medical staff here because, we do have control freaks, believe it or not, in the health service and so on. But I think the challenge is to recognise here are the things that I can effect change in, and here are some that I can't. So the ones that I can choose what time I wake up, I can choose whether I'm going to do a home lesson with my children or whether I'm going to take them to the park. I can choose what I'm going to eat, how much exercise I'm going to do. I can choose whether I want to look at my flight manuals and sort of brush up on things, or I think I'll just wait for things to emerge and wait for the airline to contact me. Maybe I can choose whether I'm going to look at an alternate profession at this moment. Hopefully nobody leaves the airline industry, but I can't imagine there isn't a single person who hasn't at some point thought, so what was my plan B and how could that be operationalised if it came to it? So from that point of view, I think these challenges can be embraced to an extent. It doesn't mean that's what we should do. It means here's where our mind can take us so that whatever it is that we fear is actually not as big. We can squash it down a bit in some kind of way. Well, Well, there are several things that we can do, even in the face of things not being complete in front of us and that we don't necessarily see the way forward. In fact, Viktor Frankl, a very famous psychiatrist who was incarcerated in a concentration camp in the Second World War, one of the things that he said is that when you can't change the facts around you, the only thing that you're left with is changing yourself. And so whereas there are some limitations to this, because obviously many people died in the Second World War and in concentration camps, it's a very interesting and positive challenge for us. And the sort of things that we can change in ourselves at this particular time are firstly to acknowledge the situation. The biggest problem that I see as a clinician are people who are in denial that there is a problem. So it's not that they can't see the difficulties and the trouble going on around them. The point is that they think that if they use their normal problem solving, the problem will then go away. And here we have to think outside of the box. Another thing is, remember that we're all in this together, which may sound like I'm the government speaking here. I don't mean to sound as haughty as that. But everyone is equalised. The one thing that I'm experiencing, and patients are telling me who I'm seeing, is we're all the same. It doesn't matter what your rank, it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter who you work for, whether you're a pilot or not. We're all faced with almost identical challenges at this moment in time. And that sense of equalisation is helpful, because I think there's nothing worse than thinking it's only you who's dealing with this problem. The third thing I would say is don't personalise it. You haven't done something wrong. You didn't overspend. You didn't turn right when you should have turned left. It's not about that. The world is changing around us. This was probably unforeseen at this kind of scale. So we didn't have a roadmap for this. And so therefore, it's absolutely fine not to know what the solution is. I'm sure that there are cliches in this. We go through, in our lifetime, numerous challenges. And for each person, we have our own experience and our own stories about those. They're usually very private ones. We tend not to broadcast what it was. It could have been a miscarriage. It could have been a relationship that went awry. It could have been we didn't get into flight school in the year that we wanted. We didn't get the job we wanted. Perhaps command didn't come when we wanted. Every one of us experiences some kind of personal failure or trauma that goes with it. I think it's an important time to remember what those feelings were like, and then to think, well, how did we get through it? I realise, the stakes here are very high, and they can be to do with financial well-being, family stability, and so on. But there are core things about our own resilience that we will have already built up through previous experience, and if we can remind ourselves about those, we may not be able to use the same solution, but we can take the emotional experience from that and think, it made me a better person. And even in my life and in the work that I'm doing, there are so many things that are coming out of COVID-19 which I don't wish this condition upon anyone, but it's certainly made me rethink what I do, how I do it, what's important to me in my life, who the important people are, and so on. I think we're all going through these kind of life reviews. And there are not many times in our life where this is going to happen, and it's being forced upon us, but let's make good out of it. Keep a routine. We've probably heard that so many times, and those people who are listening here may think, well, there's a psychologist telling us the obvious. It is the obvious, but if you look at all the data there, and anything from if you're an astronaut and you might not have the same kind of exposure to night, day that we would on Earth, and so on, keep the routine, and the routine should be a steady waking time, probably, for many of us, starting with some exercise, always a very good thing, because that will help to lift the mood, release adrenaline and endorphins and so on. The other is affiliate. I know that we are very good at chatting online and social media and so on. The one thing that this virus has done in a very profound way from a psychological perspective is caused huge distancing between people. Obviously physical distancing that we all know about, but it's also caused some emotional distancing because we don't have proximal relationships. We can't touch people, we can't go near them, we can't visit them and so on. But it is important that we're reaching out to people. And I would say it's extremely important, especially if there's somebody who you feel in your family might be vulnerable, to be in touch with them. Because all the evidence suggests that a text a day, or just a check-in, hi, how are you doing, what did you do, can be hugely beneficial in terms of people's general well-being, raise their mood, and of course do a little bit for oneself as well. The other is to put all of the challenges into some kind of perspective. I certainly find this quite useful. When I feel anxious about something and I'm no different to anyone else, I tend to write it down. I externalize it in some way, because when it's sitting in my mind going around, it's going to wake me up at 3 in the morning. If I write it down or type it out, I can see it over there. I can close my laptop, I can push it away. I can set up another column of my page, then go, well, what's the antidote? What's the solution to that? And if there's a blank space, fine. Well, why don't I phone my best friend and say, and ask, I have a very pressing problem over here, I have no idea what to do, what would you do? And it is remarkable because most people will come up with an idea intuitively. So I think these sorts of things at a practical level are very important. They help to keep our head above water during these very difficult times, and we haven't run the full course of it yet. So, we don't know what new challenges lie just over the horizon, and what sort of jobs we're all going to be going back to anyway, and what form those will take, what fleets there will be, etc. The natural tendency, as mentioned, is that we're going to reach for carbohydrate type food and sugary foods because we're in hyperdrive at the moment. Even though we're not working as actively and perhaps exercising as vigorously as we were before, blood sugar levels are going to fluctuate because of stress. And so the quick fix to all of that would be the kind of foods that make us feel good. I don't know a single person who's not complained about putting on weight. I would include myself a little bit, but we're all a bit vain, and there will come a time when we'll be able to do something about it. At this moment, many people are actually eating quite well, because for once, eating or dietary concerns are about the only thing we have some control over. We will stand in a queue or a line outside Tesco or Waitrose or whatever else in order to pick up our food, but we're going to be very careful about what we choose, and we're going to think about it more than we would at any other time, because we're going to have a little bit more time in our supermarkets and so on. So there are a lot of people who are eating more healthily. The problem is we're probably eating more than we actually need because we're in this unknown period. There will come a time, as we said, when we can, not necessarily convert fat to muscle, because we know that that's impossible, but where we can shed a bit of fat and build up the muscle again. But maybe right now, that's not the time for us to be focusing too much on that. Sleeping medication should always be prescribed. Obviously, we do know that people can access it in a variety of other means and methods. Sleeping medication is used sparingly, but usually to correct poor sleep. And poor sleep can come about due to low mood or anxiety. And I would say, firstly, go and treat low mood and anxiety. Firstly, they're more amenable to treatment. And if we think in terms of sleep disturbance as usually being a symptom of the difficulties that we're having in the day, that would be the obvious thing: catch the problem upstream. The kind of interventions that we use for low mood and anxiety would be cognitive behavior therapy, mindfulness, and so on. So the talking therapies here are hugely effective. Many pilots will have experienced at some point in their lives dysregulation to sleep. That may come from just general sense of fatigue due to rostering. It may be obviously the various kind of trips they're being rostered for so that they never get corrective sleep and so on. And a GP usually would have no difficulty prescribing some medication to help the sleep in the short term. The thing about sleeping pills is if you take them medium to long term, they become quite addictive, and therefore your body will not want to go to sleep without them, and now you're in a catch-22 situation. So we use it sparingly, and we use it just to kickstart sleep again. There are other methods to improve sleep, which include using mindful apps like the Headspace one, which can be easily downloaded, and it's got some very good programs to help with sleep. You can take hay fever medication, which can help to increase a sense of drowsiness and so on, and also take care over the kind of rituals or habits that we go through before we go to sleep. I think all of us know if you do a lot of screen time before bed, it's quite stimulating to the brain. So it could be music, it could be reading a book, probably not a Kindle, but a real proper book if you've still got one on your shelf, and the like, that those things will make a difference, and probably to moderate exercise just before going to sleep. But having 1 or 2 nights of bad sleep doesn't mean that we have a sleep problem. Everyone in their life will have had this at some particular point. I think we're talking about something more chronic, where perhaps 10 days, 14 days on, sleep is perhaps only 4 or 5 hours for no apparent reason. Maybe time to phone your doctor and you'll get an online consultation. Well, social media is part of our life these days, isn't it? I'm one of those people who doesn't have Facebook or any of most I've got is a WhatsApp. Partly for this reason, I think it's quite addictive. I think what is important here is it depends on what the value or the use of social media is. So it's not the instrument per se, it's the value that we attach to it. And I think the problem here is that if our whole social life pivots around social media, it's going to at times stimulate us, at other times it's going to upset us. I think we're going to have reactions to it. So I think all I'd say is do it in moderation and get a real life outside of it in parallel.
Rob, thank you very much.
Noted.